Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, if you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com and submit a report. All right, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest needs no introduction. He's been on the show for 10 times now, and he's definitely a fan favorite. Of course, I'm talking about Josh Turner. Josh, welcome back.
Hey, Vic.
Hey, it's been a long time. Episode 186 was the last time you came on and told the listeners about these encounters. What have you been up to?
It's actually, I think it was 188.
188?
Yeah, 188. It was, I think we did a two-parter. It was 186, and then there was somebody, you had somebody in 187, and then I finished up with 188 because if I remember correctly, it was near Valentine's, and we did like a two-parter. Like we did it 1 week, like on a Wednesday, and then we did it on the next week. It was a Wednesday.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah, because you talk to so many people, you probably don't remember. But I remember there was like a Wednesday and a Friday episode, and everybody was stoked that they were getting two episodes, the Wednesday and the Friday episode, and then mine was on the Wednesday. So, yeah, I thought that was pretty cool, the way you did it.
Oh, it's always great to have you on anytime that you can come on. You know that.
Yeah, I like that extra episode in there too, because then, it gives me something to listen to. The Wednesday and then the Friday, but anyways, I know a lot of people, are aware of this. I got really sick and I ended up in the hospital back in November, and I was in the ICU for 6 days. My blood pressure got really bad and my medication wasn't working. And so I ended up, oh man, dude, my blood pressure, I think the highest it got was 268 over 133. And so, yeah, I nearly died. I mean, I was like, it was bad, and they couldn't get it under control. I mean, they were trying everything. I was on the Cardine drip and nitroglycerin and everything else. They were, and so it was an awakening for me. I got more serious about my health and eating better and just working out all the time. And now I've lost over 70 pounds. So since November. So yeah, it was very important for me to do that, or I was probably not going to be on this earth, So that's kind of what I've been up to. My workload is increased as of late because I'm actually got my blood pressure more stable, and the anxiety problems that we're also attributing to the causing my blood pressure. I've gotten that under control. So, it's still a battle, because I still get these like anxiety attacks, and I think I just had undiagnosed panic and anxiety disorder. And so they diagnosed me, that I needed to take medication for that, and that has helped tremendously keep my blood pressure under control, and just being able to eating better. My wife, she takes really good care of me. She's like my nurse, and I don't think I could have made it through without her. And, my nephews and my brother, they all take really good care of me. So yeah. And I haven't been on the show pretty much for that reason, because I haven't been able to process a lot of the encounters that I receive. And I know a lot of you out there listening do send me encounters. And if I missed something, because I know that there were some good ones in there that I didn't, and I actually deleted some of my emails on accident. So I apologize if any of you guys want to resend them. Now I'm actually processing them. And I had to put the idea of my show on hold because obviously my health was not going to allow it. But now that I am becoming healthier physically, I'm ready now. I think me and Armando Salazar, he's the guy, he's my partner that we're going to be doing the show together with. We're gearing up to maybe getting started within the next week or two. Hopefully by the end of next week, we'll be at least recording one of our shows. And so we got some material we wanted to throw out there. And, Vic, you thought it was a good idea that I would come on and, get new listeners to who I am or whatever, and to refresh with the old listeners that already do know who I am, and to give them some encounters, to give them some stories that I have. It's been, like you said, like over a year, and since I've been on the show, so it's about time, you know.
Oh, it definitely is about time. Before we do move on, I just want to tell you I'm so glad that you're able to move past the health issues and start bouncing back to good health.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's still a work in progress. I still got, ways to go, but, losing the weight, I definitely feel better. I'm able to move around better. I mean, I can, and it's just, you get the ball rolling on that, and you can actually do more and more,
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Well, Josh, why don't we get to it? From what I understand, you've got quite a few new encounters to share, so please do that.
Yeah, we talked about maybe on this show, because I picked out like several encounters, and I started noticing that I had some really good ones where Dogman have their own encounters. And I kind of wanted to do the show. I talked to you, Vic, about that. I kind of wanted to do the show kind of like, you know what, Dogman, they're out there and, living in the woods or wherever they live and whatever they do, but they actually cohabitate, I guess, I don't know how you say the word. They live with other things. I'm a believer in many other types of cryptids, and, that's one of the things I'm going to discuss on my show too, is it's going to be all about the paranormal, but I want to talk about some of these other creatures that people see too. And one of the things I noticed was I get encounters from people where they see dogmen interacting with other creatures. And I got a story from a guy who his family, they own a ranch, and I'll get started with that one. I'll just start with that one. I'm going to call the guy Ernest, for anonymity. One of the things that's happened is I kind of did that on the last couple of times I've been on the show, if I remember correctly, just trying to get these people to have their anonymity. It's very hard because people find these places. And even when you're kind of vague, I mean, they can find some of these places. And so I don't want these people being harassed or bothered. This guy actually owns a company. He owns a business, and he doesn't want to be messed with, and his grandfather is very, he doesn't want anybody messing around with their property. So I'm just going to say that this property is in Texas. That's what I'm going to say. And, the first thing that happened was, 13 years ago, back in 2006, he said that they were having a barbecue. And they were getting together. He was a teenager, a young guy, and there were 30 plus people, and they were out in the country, way out in the country, and they were shooting guns because country people, that's what they do. They shoot guns, and so they were out there and they were firing off rounds, and they were drinking, and having fun. Most of the people there were drinking, having a good time, whatever. And his grandfather, apparently had an encounter with what I can only describe as a dogman when he was in Mexico as a young man. And so, anyways, on the edge of the property, at the edge of the tree line, I should say, a couple of the people noticed that there was something moving around in the tree line, making noise, like tree, twig snapping, whatever. I got their attention. The guy that told me that the guy in question was a young man. Him and his friends and the people at the party, they see this, the silhouette of a creature. They couldn't really make out what it was, but it had dark amber yellow eyes. And that doesn't in and of itself make a dogman. That doesn't say, hey, that was a dogman. And he was clear about that. He said, I didn't know anything. I just, but my grandfather reacted immediately when he saw the eyes, when we saw the eye shine. He's like, my grandfather immediately thought that there was something wrong. And he came over there to where we were at, where he could get a good look at it. And he raised his gun. Ernest, the guy raised his gun at it and he just kind of leveled it. The eyes moved. The eye shine went from 4 to 5 foot to 7 to 8 feet. And he said that just like shocked him. He was like, whoa, what was that? And he kind of looked at his grandfather. His grandfather nodded his head like, and so he fired off a couple rounds. Of course, he was a teenager. This thing just like, he said he just shot in the general direction, not even really aiming at it, But this thing moved so quick that it bolted into the woods. And it shocked him because he had never seen anything go from that like 4 to 5 feet to 7, 8 feet. Like, what creature can do that? Well, his grandfather told him later on that he knew what that was, that he had encounters with these creatures before. Once when he was a young man in Mexico and twice when he was here in the United States. So his grandfather wasn't shocked by it. He was not unnerved by it. He's a pretty hard man. He understood like this is something, that's not a normal thing. And so he kind of made Ernest understand that, like these things are there. And he kind of, they have certain guidelines that they have to kind of follow with these things on their property. And so that was his introduction as a little kid, like not a little kid, but like a teenager, a young, I shouldn't say a little kid, young man, That was his introduction to these creatures or what they were. But it was the first encounter. It wasn't the last. A couple years later, he and a friend were working outside doing some stuff, doing some work for his grandfather. And same thing happened again. They see these eyes, same thing. He recognized it as the same, the yellow amber eyes. Him and his friend just kind of froze. They watched it. He had a gun on him. Because they always, even as a kid, I started shooting guns at 9. So it's no surprise to me as a teenager, he would have a gun living out in the country, living deep out in the woods. He, moved toward his gun and the creature immediately went back into the woods. And he said that was when he realized that these things had a human level intelligence. Like they knew what a gun was. Like they knew that a firearm was dangerous. And I have heard that so many times from witnesses that whenever they level a gun or they go to reach for a gun, these creatures react. Like they know, that is something that causes pain. And so that was, that was like his second encounter, but there were several others, and most of them were pretty quick, like seeing one moving across the property. But there was another encounter in particular where he and his friend Joe were working outside remodeling. And, this was at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And they were working with a couple other guys, and one of the workers wanted to smoke a cigarette. And so he went heading back to his truck to get his lighter. And he heard, like a rustling in some woods that were like, the way he described it, there was like I can't remember what it was that he described. A retaining wall. I think my nephew's right here. He's trying to help me remember. He told, because my nephew and Armando, my research partner, we all interviewed the guy together. It's always nice when you can talk to the person like in person and get their story. But he said there was like a retaining wall and that one of these creatures, one of these dogmen, like it walked over the top of the retaining wall and he could see it like behind the bushes, and that it jumped over the bushes off of the retaining wall and like right down, like almost in front of him. And, he was still a couple feet away from the truck. The dogman was a couple feet away from the truck, but it stayed down, not really on all fours, but kind of squatting. Is that correct? He was squatting. Yeah. And so, he was squatting down and it just kind of watched him, just kind of stared at him, kind of sniffed the air, sniffed in his direction. He just froze because this was the first time that he had ever actually seen one up close. Like there was no doubt what it was. It wasn't a silhouette. It wasn't eye shine. It was right there, like right in front of him. And he said that he just tried to pretend like he wasn't afraid. He just tried to keep calm. He did have a sidearm, a holstered sidearm. And he just become accustomed to carrying it around the property. And so he began to walk away from it. And now, if something goes down, the closest property to his grandfather's property there was 40 minutes away. So, and if it was walking distance, it'd be like 40 minutes. You know, I mean, if something happens, I mean, you know, that there's a good stretch between his property and the next property over. So he began walking toward the other side of the truck away from this thing. He kind of backed up, walked toward the front of the truck. And he said that he had his pistol out at that point, you know, like because when he first heard the rustling, he had drawn the weapon. And this creature, as he started to move, he moved his hand with the gun. The thing looked right at the firearm and looked up at him and literally shook its head like no. Like told him, like, don't even try it. Like literally gave him a head nod, like no. Like, don't even move that gun. And he said that he knew in his mind that if this thing just took a step toward him, he didn't even know that he'd be able to get a shot off, you know? And so he's away from his friends. His friends are like down the hill or whatever. And he's on the other side of the truck. He slowly walks to the front of the truck. He says, I took the gun and I laid it down on the hood of the truck. I backed away from the truck. I put my hands up like, hey, I'm not doing anything. He said this thing stared at him for a few more seconds and then leaped to the other side of the truck, not over the truck, but like, you know, from the back of the tailgate, that it like kind of like just leaped over to the other side. And then it put its hand on the tailgate and like lifted itself up. And he said when it did, it made a pop. Now, I've heard that a lot. Like people say that's what they hear. They hear this popping noise when they have their encounter. And he said when he did that, he heard that pop, and then it just jumped and it went back over the retaining wall a good 10 feet, you know, away from where he was at, just leaped over it, and then just like was down on all fours and back into the brush and was gone. And he said that was kind of his introduction to, you know, actually seeing one face to face, but that wasn't his last encounter. And another thing, I forgot, another thing he said was that when it got to the edge of the woods, it turned and it like gave a howl. I guess the way he described it was like a guttural howl. And he said when he did, he could feel it. Like he could actually feel the sound from this thing. And he said that his heart was like just racing, you know, like it was terrifying. But he said that, you know, over time he would see these creatures, you know, periodically he'd see them, or people around the property would see them. The workers would see them, and they just became accustomed to them. They really didn't cause many problems. His grandfather did introduce some cattle, to the property, a few years back, and there were no problems. Like these things weren't like poaching the cattle or whatever. But about 3 or 4 years ago, the cattle, I guess he said, had already been there for about 2 years, I think. Is that what he said? I think it was about 2 years, and he said that the cattle were there. And then he said that about 3 or 4 years ago, which would have been about 2 years after the cattle were introduced, they started having problems with cows disappearing. Now, the cows weren't being found. They weren't finding cows like slaughtered or dead. The cows were just disappearing. Like they would do a head count and they'd be like, where are these steer going? They're just gone. You know, they're not on the property. We don't know, you know, we can't find them. You know, they would do these checks. They'd go everywhere. And so there was an argument on the property about where, you know, and what and who. And of course they started, you know, saying, well, we got these wolves running around on the property, and the grandfather had told them not to attack them, not to hurt them, not to shoot them. If they are not bothering you, don't bother them. So it's kind of like they had a truce with them. They didn't want to, they had a big argument about it, and it was out in the open, and it got kind of heated between some of the family members. And they said, well, we need to start doing something because cattle are disappearing. And according to Ernest, it wasn't, but like, you know, it wasn't like they were like, you know, 20, 30 cows. No, it was like several, you know, less than 10. But they were worried that these things were going to start poaching their cattle and doing it regularly. And they didn't have any other explanation for it. They didn't know what it could have been, you know. And so there were people being accused. Are you taking the cows? Are there, you know, so there was all this commotion going on. And some of the people got a little nervous and started, aggravated, whatever, and they began to blame the Dogmen, saying that it was them that were taking the cows. Well, all this was going on, and they had a really large Dogman on the property that he says, in his estimation, was over 10 feet. They called it the Alpha, and he said it was a very distinct color, that it was a blackish color, and it had like a grayish-white speckles, or the way he tried to describe it, I can't really, sounds like splotching, like of the hair. Not like it was aging, but like it had like a grayish, color mixed in, or whitish color mixed in with the black. And he said that this one was a very distinct animal, and that there was a smaller one that looked very similar to it. It had to have been like its offspring. And he claims that they became accustomed to seeing this creature, and that usually he was accompanied by one or two others. And he said that they never saw any females. Now, I asked him about that, and I said, what do you mean you never saw any females? He said, well, they always were male. And he said their genitalia looked like a male dog. That's what he said. He said you could see it. It was like they were males. You could see it. And, but the way that he described the creatures was that just most of the Texas descriptions I get. Now, tonight, I'm going to tell you that that's not always the case. But 90% of the ones I get, if I had to put a percentage on it, it would be even higher than that. Most of the ones I get, because I know I've heard you, Chris Edge, David Kyleman, different people talk about how there's different types of these dogmen. And I've talked to a lot of these different researchers, and there's different types. I don't really encounter that. I'm not really getting that from these stories. Most of which I get are just human looking upper body, very werewolfish looking, the backward bent legs, tall, 7-8 foot is usually about average. Sometimes they're a little bit smaller, sometimes a little bit bigger. I've heard some stories, but typically it's the werewolfish looking type creature that we're dealing with. That seemed to be what these creatures were. The descriptions he gave me, it was absolutely to a T. Reminded me of the Hernandez Ranch, very similar, the same kind of creatures, same kind of MO, whatever. But these guys didn't really, they didn't really seem to be a problem with these until the cows started missing. But he was riding around on his 4-wheeler one day, kind of, checking the fence line or whatever. And, he sees the large male, as he called it, the Alpha. They don't really have a name for it. They just called it Alpha. And it comes out to the edge of the property, and it's standing there, and it's holding something in its hand, literally. And he said that it was holding something very large. But the way it was holding it was just like, like one of us would hold a bag of groceries from like the grocery store, And he said it just had it, and it just like when him and his partner were on the 4-wheeler, they drove up about 50 yards from this thing. They could see it, and it walked out of the clearing, came toward them about halfway, and then just tossed this, whatever it was that it was holding in their direction, and then kind of backed off. Now, he said that they both got out of the 4-wheeler, but his friend, was, afraid to get as close to it as he was. And he didn't have as much experience with it as he did. So he walked up to this, thing, whatever it was that he had thrown, and realized that it was like a carcass. Now, he described to us a creature, and I'm going to tell you right now, I have heard accounts of a creature very similar to this, and I've actually heard it like maybe 3-4 times now. It's starting to become like I've heard this a few times. He said that this thing was very white, whitish gray. Obviously it had been killed. The Dogman had killed it, is what he believes. The chest had been ripped open, like it looked like it had been chewed and torn open. The organs or whatever, he didn't really get a good look at the organs. It just had a big gaping gash in the middle of it, like it had just been mauled. He said the arms and the legs were really long. He said if he had to estimate the length of it, it was probably 7-8 feet. which is a big creature, but he said that it was very skinny and very thin. And he said that you could almost see the bones through the skin. It was so thin. But that it had this weird looking head. And he said the head looked like it was like an oval shaped head with these weird looking like big eyes, and the nose just was like two slits. That was interesting because I've heard that description before of these, whatever they are. And he said that the mouth was about half the size of a dinner plate. Is that correct? Yeah. And he said that the mouth was about half the size of a dinner plate. And he said that the thing had very big teeth, like large canines. You could see it, and it looked like it was just, the head was all mouth. You know what I mean? Like it was just made to chew and eat. And he said it was very thin. And he didn't know if maybe the insides had been ripped out, and maybe it was ripped, whatever. But he said he got a look at it, and he said that he walked back to his four-wheeler and he went to go, grab his radio. And he said that when he turned around, the male came out, the alpha came out of the woods, grabbed it, and went back into the woods. And he said that it was almost like it was watching him, letting him get a look at it, and then disappearing. Now, after that, the cattle stopped disappearing. He believes, and what he told us, was that this creature was what was responsible for the cattle being poached, being killed. And after that, there were no more problems. And he said that it was very strange and very odd that and it was like just, one of these really weird things. It's like, it sticks in your mind, and so I don't know what I believe about, like, if that's what it was or whatever. But when he told me that story, it got me thinking, and it got my mind, kind of racing, and then I told him that I had heard of these things before. Like, I have heard of this creature. Now, I don't know if you remember, or any of the listeners, if you guys out there remember, I told a story about a friend of mine named Rock, that went out hunting on a cousin of mine's property near an area called Bertram in Texas. And I had some friends that went hunting about 12 miles from that same area. And years ago, I'm talking like, I think that this was a friend of mine. His name was Neil. And the other guy, I'm not going to say his name because I don't have permission to, but the other guy's name is Neil. He don't really care. He's, what's odd is that he's from upstate New York. Well, he told me that he had seen one of these creatures before, when he was in upstate New York, which is strange because I had another friend who had told me a story about that one night when he was drunk, and I thought he was just making stuff up. Well, Neil told me this story. This was probably back in 2005, something like that. And he told me that one night when him and my other friend, I'll call him, I don't know what to call him. I'll call him Travis, the other guy. They went out hunting about 12 miles from where my friend Rocky had his encounter with 3 dogmen. There was a barn. It was just like half a barn, and we called it, the barn tree. It was a deer stand, and it was kind of built into the inside of this half of a barn, So that particular stand, we called it the barn. But anyway, that's where Rock had his encounter with the 3 dogmen, and I don't know if anybody remembers. I don't even remember what episode that was, Vic. I can't even tell you. I just remember telling the story on your show. And I remember him leveling the gun at them and them backing off. Well, literally just about 12 miles from there, some friends of mine went hunting, and this is up in the hill country in Texas. And they claim, okay, that they saw this creature on a tree, okay, maybe 3 feet off of the ground, but wrapped around a tree. And my friend, the one named Neil, he told the other guy, he said, "Look at that. It looks like a white translucent squirrel, like a flying squirrel." But he said that this thing's head turned completely around. And he said that it looked right at him. And he said they weren't that far away. I mean, maybe 30 yards, from this thing. And he said he got a good look at it. The eyes, the same description, it was like weird. The eyes, he kind of had these, like almond-shaped eyes, but they were kind of like bigger than normal eyes. And then there was barely even any nose. It was like 2 slits for a nose. And that they had this really big mouth. Now, he described a tongue coming out that almost looked serpentine. And he said that this thing had its arms and legs wrapped around the tree, and it moved kind of to the other side of the tree and then back kind of to the, a little further up. And he said that his friend pointed his gun at it. And when it did, this thing kind of hissed, literally turned its arms and legs backwards the opposite direction and jumped down onto the ground and crawled into the underbrush. Now, when he told me that story, I thought, man, what in the heck is he talking about? And like, he claimed that he saw a creature very similar to that in upstate New York. Now, years later, I had a guy message me who is from upstate New York, lives near Rochester, but further north, or whatever, further to the I think east. And he said that they were out hunting and they ran into a creature. Now, his description of a creature very similar to that, but he also had Dogman activity going on. He claims that his uncle's property, he had never seen one, so I had no reason I couldn't really get any information about, to come on your show because it was more about that creature, But like I told you, it's weird. Like these creatures are spotted in the same area, the same territory as Bigfoot and Dogman. And like I told you, Vic, that's a hell of a way to make a living to be in those if you're a competing predator and you're in those territories. So when Ernest told me that this thing had come out of the woodline and thrown this carcass, to show them, look, this is what it was. This was what was killing your cattle. He said he believed automatically that that's what it was. And now maybe that's him wanting to believe that that's what it was. And maybe he was, because he seems to feel like these creatures won't really mess with you if you don't mess with them. I don't really have an opinion about that. I don't know what these creatures are. I don't pretend to be an expert. I go out in the field a little more now, not as much as, a lot of these other researchers, whatever, but because my wife she's very into the whole subject. So I kind of feel like, I'll go out and I'll do a little more researching and going out in the field a little more. Just kind of having to get over my fear of dealing with these things. But yeah, that's very odd. It was a very strange story, and like I said, it's one that I've heard over and over again. I kind of was, when Neil told me that, I kind of was like, okay, I was with my friend, another friend of mine, and he told us that, and we were just kind of like, well, whatever. Well, about 3 or 4 years ago, I ran into the guy I'm going to call Travis. It's not nowhere near close to his name, but I ran into him. He actually works rap concerts and stuff, and my friend owns a club, and I went in there and I talked to him, and he was in there and he was doing a promotion or whatever, and we were talking, and he told me when I told him just the very beginning of that story, he began to finish the story. He told me that is the absolute truth, Wolf. He said, I wouldn't lie to you. He said, Neil is not lying about that. He goes, we saw that. He said that thing looked like The Exorcist. He said when it flipped around backwards and ran into the underbrush, he said it looked like The Exorcist. And he even gave me a little more descriptions of it. He said Neil had already turned and was running away. Of course, Neil says it was the opposite, but, whatever. He said that Neil was already turned and was running back toward the truck. He said, dude, I stood there for a minute. I looked at it. He said that you could see the skin was translucent, Vic. He said that it was like you could see the organs in it. You know what I mean? Like, that is so weird. He said it was like it was the weirdest thing he'd ever seen. It was like the flesh was like white to the point of it was like clear. And he said it had this really big mouth with these nasty looking teeth. And he said it looked like it could just, swallow someone's head with its mouth, and he said that it was probably 7 foot long, on that tree. And it was a huge oak, it was crawling around on it. And he said it was just so bizarre, like just creepy, And, I reminded him, I said, well, Rocky had the same, experience with 3 dogmen in that same area, the same experience being that they saw cryptids, And he thought that was weird, it was 12 miles away from where they had encounters with two totally different creatures. So I know that it's very possible that these creatures could live in the same area that these dogmen, and they probably hunt the same prey. They're probably competitors. I mean, I would think of it like as lions and leopards. Leopards tend to be solitary. They're a lot smaller, and they hide up in trees. If a lion catches one or if a hyena catches one, they'll kill it. Same thing with dogman. I mean, they probably, they'll kill these things if they get, it's a competitor. Why wouldn't they? So anyways, I thought that was very interesting, and I hope I told that as, eloquently as possible, because I haven't done this in so long. I'm just trying to but anyways, that was very odd. I thought that was a very interesting, little sidelight there. I know that that's not your thing, doing other cryptids, but like I said, it has something to do with these dogmen. I don't know what, but there's a lot of weird stuff out there, man. I'm telling you. And another thing I wanted to say was, one of the sons of the workers out there at this property actually came across stones that were piled up in different places around the property, and some of the workers began to take an interest in this, and they told Ernest, he's like, that they think that they're markers, that these dogmen mark their territory with like stones, like piles of stone. And another thing that he said, I mean, this guy had a lot of information about these creatures. I'm going to come back to him eventually, and we could do a whole nother show with just his stuff, but I didn't have enough time to sit there and get all of his information because it got late, and one of the sons of one of the workers out there, he says, has befriended one of the juveniles. And he doesn't really know the whole, he doesn't know if it's really both ways, or maybe if it's just the kid seems to think that it's his friend, but that's a whole nother ball of wax right there. And we didn't really get into, all of that. We didn't have time, but he said another thing he noticed was that these things like to play in the water. They have tanks that they man-made ponds, that they dig. Here in Texas, we just call them tanks because they put them out there for the cows to drink out of. Well, he said that he noticed that these dogmen will go into those tanks and bathe, as he calls them. He says that the workers have seen them do it, and he says that when the workers spot these creatures, they tend to just kind of stare at each other, and that's it. There's no real, physical confrontations. There's been nobody getting attacked or anything like that. But yeah, he had a lot to say about these creatures. And speaking of these things crawling into tanks, that's going to lead into another story I got. I dug up one of my stories from darn near a year ago. I had a couple who retired, and they were living down in Florida, and they I'm not going to give the name of the area. That's just going to have to be. I'm just not going to be able to do that anymore because people will go and find these places. But these people, they have a pond that's in the back of their property. Now there is a swampy area not far from where they live, and they dug a man-made pond in that area, stocked it with fish, and they actually lived in another area prior to that had a lot of problems with alligators, So they moved to this other area where they thought it was far enough away from the swamp that they wouldn't have that problem. Well, guess what? An alligator, a really large male, took up residence in their pond. And they were out fishing, and this thing popped up out of the water, and it scared their grandson pretty bad. He was a teenager when it happened. And so they knew then that, you know what? If you're in Florida, these things will actually travel pretty far distances on land. I don't know if people realize that or what, but apparently they do. And he said that this thing wasn't, it's not like they were right next to a swamp. He's like there was a swamp in the area, but it was still miles away. But this thing managed to get in and just chose to live in that pond. And they put a lot of time, money, and effort into building this pond. And originally got contacted by the granddaughter. And then the grandmother was accommodating enough to tell me some of these stories that they had. Well, on this same property, they had a Dogman issue. They were seeing mostly just like 2 or 3 little, like what she said, like skinny looking, little skinny ones. And, they would see them kind of roaming through the property, kind of going, like across the property. They looked like really she said elongated, wolves with like these really, like the back legs kind of stuck up like higher than the upper body, which is what she said. And she thought that they were really odd looking. And then one day her and her granddaughter saw them stand up, like one of them stand upright and just kind of sniff the air and stare in their direction. Then she thought, well, that makes sense. That's why the body looks the way it does when they're on all fours. So the grandson told her, he's like, yeah, I've seen those things out there, Well, one night, just cut to the chase, one night they had a loud commotion going on near the pond. They heard yelping and snarling and like hollering, what sounded almost like wailing, as she described it. And the next day they go out there and there's blood on the bank of the tank of the pond, and they could see that male out there. And this alligator was surly, and they had kind of just learned to live with it. It's just going to be there. There's nothing you can do about it. It's just it's just going to be there. And that they think sometimes it would leave to go who knows where. They did say there was like a little stream not far from there, maybe that it would go and hang out in that stream, and then sometimes it would come back to the pond. They didn't know for sure. And they said that a couple days after that noise, all that ruckus, they found, well, no, actually, let me back up a little bit. There was another ruckus, and there was a lot of spitting, snarling, same thing, but it was like just loud roaring, growling. And she said that it was really dark, from their back patio, the back deck to this particular pond. She's like, you couldn't really see, from how far away the house was. You had to kind of get closer and shine a light. She said, well, her grandson ran out there because he wanted to see. So this was based on what the grandson said. Grandson said that he saw, best he could figure, 2, 3 what looked like these upright canines were pulling that alligator out of the water and were fighting with it. They were chewing on it. They were biting it. They were grabbing it. They were pulling it. And a couple days later, they found this alligator, like the carcass, pieces of it anyway, just scattered all the way to the tree line. And they found the head completely removed and just tossed off to the side. So the best I could figure and what the lady seems to think happened was one of these juveniles might have went to the water to drink, and maybe the alligator bit it, tried to snatch it up, try to pull it, something, hurt it maybe, or maybe even wounded it to the point maybe it died. I don't know. A couple days later, the rest of the tribe or clan or whatever come out there, they kill it, pulled it out of the water and just killed this sucker. So that I thought was like, that was a pretty interesting story. And so that kind of that's another Dogman encountering other creatures. It just kind of goes along with that whole theme I was telling you. These stories, man, it's crazy. Dogmen, they're very, from what I've gathered, they're territorial and they're very clannish too. If there's a group of them, they're very protective of their younger. They're very protective of each other, and they tend to work together. They're very wolf-like. So, I mean, and they don't take no mess, dude. I've noticed that, like, if there's other creatures in the area, a lot of times they leave because the Dogmen typically will prey upon just about anything at once. And if something attacks them, they retaliate. So that's kind of what I gathered from that story was that that's what these Dogmen did. They went and took care of business. And then after that, there was no more problems in that pond, And I asked her, I'll call her Dee. I asked Dee, I corresponded with her briefly, and I said, were there any more problems, like with the Dogman and alligators, anything? She's like, no, the property's been very peaceful. She says, we haven't even seen any of the Dogmen in a while, So, I don't know. That's what she says, and that's what they told me, and so that's all I can do is tell you what I heard. Now, I do have a couple other strange stories. Let me get into that. One of the stories I wanted to tell you, this is coming back down to Texas. This happened in a town around Houston. I don't want to give the exact town because the guy actually works in this town and he's almost my age now, but this is the one I was telling you about. There were two brothers and they were staying the night at a friend's house. And, they were playing video games, Sega, Nintendo, whatever. I don't remember exactly what was popular at that time. I'm speculating because I remember, he said that he was 14 and his brother was 12 when this happened. So I'm assuming if he's 40 years old, it's probably Sega, Nintendo, whatever. It's not important to the story, but I don't know. I remember I'm nostalgic for the old days, but he said that they were up all night playing games, whatever. And about 2 a.m, mom and dad got in an argument. Now, apparently his friend, the friend's dad was an alcoholic. And so he would periodically have domestic problems with his wife. So him and his brother got kind of scared. So they left. And then they told the friend, hey, goodbye, we're going to go. So they began to walk home. Now, the reason they were walking home, I asked him, he said was because his mother worked for a janitorial service, a cleaning service, and she would work all night cleaning these buildings. So they didn't have, he didn't have a dad. So they were, on their own. So they took off walking, to get out of that situation, and, felt sorry for him. You're a little kid and you got to walk home in the middle of the night because some drunk, but what are you going to do? So they're walking home. Well, the way home is across some railroad tracks. And he said that when they got close to the railroad tracks, they could see something, and there's this really tall, like weeds, And he said that they could see something moving around in those weeds. And his little brother had a flashlight and he shined the flashlight right on it. And he said when they saw what it was this big, hairy creature. He said that it was hunched over. And he said that it didn't turn right away, but when they shined the light toward the head, he said the head, when it turned around, there was blood on the mouth. And he said that he doesn't remember, there being anything in the mouth, but his little brother swears that it was holding what looked like half of a cat. So, there's a dispute there, memory is what it is. He said that when this thing turned and looked at him, it dropped the cat and just kind of stared at him, kind of turned its head the other way, kept turning and looking around. He said this thing was just moving its head around like it was deciding what it was going to do. He said they were just frozen there. And he said that they looked down the tracks and they could see a train coming. The light was getting brighter. They knew there was a train coming, you could feel it. And so he's like, what do we do? We're stuck right here on the other side of these tracks. So they just kept trying to kind of walk away, further down away. And he said that there was another crossing that they could go, but they'd have to go through all these, weeds and all this, stuff. So he's like, we don't want to have to go. There's another place that we could have, the road. And he said that we'd had to wait for the train. We'd had to, whatever. So he's like, well, that's what we decided. He goes, we're just going to walk this way. And hopefully this thing doesn't follow. It just loses interest. Well, they just started slowly backing away and then they started walking, paralleling the train tracks. He said this thing then decided to jump. Just the way he worded it, it jumped like a good 2 feet from where it was at and was just right there on the pavement. And he said that they were standing on one side of the tracks and it was standing on the other. And it said that it was just staring at him. And he said that he got a really good look at the face. He said it was gray and that the fur was black, but the face looked kind of gray. And it said that in certain spots, it was like you could see like a scar or something like on his face. He's like, he goes, I was close enough. I could see the face very clearly. He said that the eyes were yellow and he said that the bottom teeth stuck up. Like he could see the teeth, were like both up and down. Like he could see them, but the bottom teeth in particular, like they were sticking up, you know. And he said that it was a just terrifying creature. And I asked him how tall it was. He said he was 4 or 5 feet, you know, squatting down, because he said he didn't actually see it stand straight up when it was, you know, but he could tell that it was humanoid because it had what looked like hands instead of paws coming out of the top of its, you know, where the legs should have been. And he did describe a backward bent legs, which he didn't really notice right away, but he said that when he saw it later running, he saw it. You know, now he said that at this point the train tracks, because they were on a road and it was a crossing, the arms of the tracks came down. And he said that that's when it kind of backed away from the tracks and then kind of stood there looking at them and began to parallel them. And at this point, the train comes and it goes in between them and this creature. And so they couldn't run completely in the opposite direction because that would be taking them way away from where they needed to be. So they ran kind of parallel to the train, and they got to this clearing. And he said the clearing was a good 50 yards, and then they had to go through this vacant lot that was full of like broken down furniture, like an old couch and crap like that. And he said that when they were running through there, like they kept looking at this thing, and the thing was following them. It was paralleling them. I think it had made up its mind that it would rather have them than the cat. That's what he said. And of course, now I say when I tell these stories, I'm not giving my opinion necessarily, but like he's telling me this is what he thinks. Okay. And he said that this thing was like paralleling them, but they could see it through the train as the train's going through, you know, they could see it kind of shuffling. And he said the way it ran was weird. It would kind of lean down on all fours and then push with its back legs and just kind of push itself forward. That was what its, locomotion, no pun intended, but that was how it ran. That was its, you know, and so he said that this thing was like keeping up with him very easily and that he could see it whenever the trains would go across, you know, and his little brother was already crying at this point, you know, and he said that they could see it in between the train cars, you know, they could see it like looking at him, like it was keeping an eye on him, you know. So he said that they got, because the train was so long, thank God, that they were able to run through this, vacant lot, you know, and they got to this, apartment, this abandoned apartment complex, and they thought, well, you know what, we can hide out in this apartment complex. He's like, I don't know what made us think that, because, you know, we go into one of these apartments, it's just going to come and kick the door in and attack us, you know, or whatever. He's like, he told his brother maybe we could squeeze into a window. And the little brother was like, no, it's just going to break in. And then, so anyway, it was remodeling was going on. They were renovating, this apartment building. So they ran underneath this, the fence, and they find a tree, like a big giant oak tree, because they actually had been in this complex before. He knew the complex. So they found this big tree and they climbed up it, you know, as best that I could understand, I guess, the way that they had to like go to the first floor or whatever and then kind of go onto the tree and then go up the tree. So that's the way he described it to me, but that's neither here nor there. They climbed up a tree and then they had to leap about 5 feet across from the top of this, the strongest branch onto the third floor of this apartment complex. And he said it wasn't no easy thing, you know, it was like they had to, you know, whatever. And so he had to like jump over there and then talk his little brother into jumping. And he said his little brother almost fell, you know, and so they're sitting on top of the roof of this thing and, you know, good 10 minutes goes by. They see this creature walking through the complex. Nobody's around. There's nobody around anywhere. It's like at this point, probably 3 a.m, you know, 2:33, whatever. Thing is walking, sniffing the air. They see it like shuffling like through the parking lot, looking up, looking in all directions. And he said that at one point, you know, they were laid down with their heads just kind of peeking over the side. And he said that it looked right up at him and he thought, oh no, it saw us. And so they moved their heads down. The little brother was crying. So he said he had to turn and hold his little brother and put his hand over his mouth to get him to shut up. You know, and it's funny because when he was telling me this story, I was almost going like, shut up, kid. You know, it's like you're watching a horror movie and you're like, dude, be quiet, you know. And he said his little brother was just crying and, you know, he could feel the tears going down over his hand. And he said that this thing walked right up to the tree, and then it went underneath the tree, going toward the building where they were at, and he lost sight of it. Now, at that point, he thought, oh, my God. So he's laying there, middle of the night, two little scared kids, and they're thinking that this thing is going to come busting through the roof. And they don't know. I mean, they have no idea. So he said they just laid there for what felt like hours, and then, he closed his eyes, and he woke up, and he could hear birds chirping, and it was daylight. And him and his little brother are laying there on the roof, and they managed to, get themselves down, and they ran back to their house. They got home. The mom asked them, where were you? She had been home since like 5 a.m. and had been calling everybody and whatever, the police, everybody. They told the story. Mom didn't believe them. She understood that they had to leave because of the domestic violence that was going on, but she was very, upset, And, so anyway, that's his story. And I felt really bad for the guy. He was reliving it when he told me, and it was very hard. It was very hard to listen to at times because, it's just one of those things. But anyways, that's that story. And so, another story I got is, this one's just a little sidelight. It's not really a story, I can really tell you a story, but there's a guy that contacted me, and he's actually from Texas, it's not from far out of Austin. And, he's a preacher in Idaho. And I thought it was pretty interesting. He sent me a message, and, I just have a little story. It's not a real big one, but he doesn't know what it is or what it was. But he did send me pictures, and I have the pictures, and he sent me a picture of tracks that were on his roof. They had something going on. Something was bumping around the house. Something was coming up to their house in Idaho. One winter it snowed, and he managed to take pictures of the tracks because this thing was climbing around the roof. They're very odd looking. I don't know what to make of them. I mean, it could be a Dogman. I definitely don't think it was a Bigfoot. He said that there's a canyon not too far from there where they like to go hiking, but now he's kind of apprehensive because they've heard howls coming out of that canyon, just blood-curdling howls. They heard what they thought was a cow just being slaughtered, close to his property. And, so, I don't know what to make of it. Him and his buddy went hiking. They think that they may have been stalked by a Dogman down in that canyon. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And the fact that he had pictures of the tracks. And so if you want those pictures, Vic, I can send them to you. It's very, very unnerving. So anyways, I just wanted to touch on that because the guy sent me his story, and he was originally from Texas. So, he claimed that when they were down in this area, that he had heard some of the same sounds. And that area where he used to live, that whole corridor from there, that area here in Texas where he lived, going west all the way out to like Kerrville is like, I have heard Dogman, and I've heard Bigfoot, and I've heard all kinds of stuff. And like I said before, I do have probably 30 plus Bigfoot stories, and I have a couple in particular that were pretty gnarly that, so, like we talked about maybe going on the Bigfoot Eyewitness or whatever, I definitely would like to come on there and tell a couple of those. I have one, story, Vic, and if you allow me, it sounds like a Bigfoot story, but the way the mouth and the teeth, I really don't. I think it's a Sasquatch, but it could be a Dogman. I don't really know what to make of it. There was a guy who worked, and this happened up in Washington. I'm not even going to give the city where he's from. I'll call him Earl. Big guy, big dude, man, and had a real deep booming voice. Told me a story. This was probably about 3 years ago. I've had this story for a while, but I never really thought of it as a Dogman story. But then I recently heard another story that made me think, I think Sasquatch, but it could be Dogman, but I'm willing to tell this story on the Bigfoot show too. He was supposed to be working, for a company, and I don't even want to give exactly what it is because he still works for them. where they go out into the country and they have to survey and do things. And they drove around these little trucks. I don't know if people remember, this happened, he said, back in the early 90s. These trucks, these little mini trucks, I guess, they were like little small ones, the little Toyota type trucks, whatever. So he said that he was out there driving one of those, and he said that he got out and he went to go do his surveying or whatever, do what he was supposed to be doing. And he was not far from a house, but he said that there was really thick woods and that he was out behind these people's property. So he walked up this trail about a quarter mile from that house, but the house was in a pretty remote region. And this is in the wilderness pretty much in Washington. And if anybody knows Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, that is a stronghold for Sasquatch. I really don't get a lot of Dogman stories out of that region. I tend to believe that that's kind of like Bigfoot. They've kind of claimed that area and that's theirs. I really believe that. I've just, the lack of Dogman stories that I've gotten. A lot of people say, oh yeah, there's a bunch of Dogman stories out there. I haven't heard them. I haven't had like a lot of them come out of that region. I've had one or two. But, not really. Most of them, are Sasquatch, and a couple of my best Sasquatch stories are Oregon and, Pacific Northwest, British Columbia. I got one near Vancouver, one near, Washington, up northern Washington. Now I was on vacation for about a month. If anybody follows me on Facebook, and I was gone for from like the middle of July to middle of August. It was great. And we went all the way up the Pacific Coast Highway. We went up Northern California, Oregon, Washington, traveled all through that area. The thick woods. I was Lake Tahoe, Reno. We went all over. We were in San Francisco, Seattle, ended up in Colorado, and then came down through Oklahoma, through Durant. Just had a really good trip. Ended up in Fort Worth and then drove all the way home. Well, all those different places, didn't see anything, didn't see nothing. We looked out the window the whole time. Didn't see a Bigfoot, didn't see a Dogman. And, believe me, I was with people who would have loved to have seen something. But anyways, some of these people are lucky enough to see them and some aren't, or maybe unlucky enough in this guy's case. So that being said, this guy, he goes out and he goes up this trail, and he said that if it was a snake, it had bit him. He said he turned and looked, and there was this creature standing there. It was a rusty brown color, as he described it. And he said it had, and I asked him too, I always try to make sure I get the description right. He said it was probably about 8-9 feet tall. He said it was a giant. And he said that it was in between two trees, one of which looked like it was dead, like it was just like a, and he said it was just kind of resting one of its arms on this tree. And he said it was just staring at him, and it was in between the two trees, and on that side of that trail where he was at, the woods were real thick. I mean, it was real thick. And he said that it was like, the canopy was almost like making it like it was dark. And this was probably broad daylight. He said it was 3 PM. It was probably, just because of the thick, the woods, And so he said that he turned, he saw this thing, and it was just standing right there. And he said it was probably like, 7-8 feet from him. And he said that he just stared at it stared at him, and he said that it just took that part of that dead tree and started just to move it, like just tear it. And he said he just moving it like it was just moving its arm, like if you just pushed, your door closed on a car. And he said that he could see it like the roots coming up, and he was like, oh my God. And he said that this thing opened its mouth and leaned toward him. And he said that if you see a shark, like a great white, he said, have you seen a great white shark, how their teeth come out, kind of grab the prey, and where the mouth of the flesh kind of goes back, like its gums came outside of its mouth, like its lips receded. And the primates do that. Baboons, chimpanzees, great apes, And he said that, but it had the biggest canines. He's like, it was just these huge teeth. And he said that it let out a roar that like he could smell the breath on this thing. And he said that he had already smelled something like dead up to that point, but he didn't know what it was. He just thought it was a dead animal. And he said when he saw this creature, he thought, oh, well, that's what the smell is. It was an ungodly smell. And that when it roared, he's like, I could feel it. I could feel the breath from this thing. And he said that it like just gave me the ugliest look. He said it had these beady little eyes. And I asked him, I said, did it have a snout, Earl? And he said it didn't have a snout, but it had kind of a muzzle, you know, and it sounded distinctly Bigfoot, you know, to me. But the way that the mouth looked or whatever, you know, he said that it looked almost like a wolf's mouth, like it had the big canines, and the muzzle was rounded, you know. I really don't understand what that meant, but that's what he told me. And he said that he took off running. And he said that he didn't hear any noise until he was about 30 yards away. And then he heard like this crashing, tearing, whatever. And he said that at one point he just kind of glanced back and the thing was like right behind him. And he said he could feel the ground shaking as it was running. You know, and he said this thing probably weighed 600 pounds. He said it had to have been 600-700 pounds. There's no way it could have weighed less than that. He said, I felt the ground shake. And he said that when he was in high school, that he was, you know, he was in track and field. He was a sprinter. He ran hurdles, very in shape at that time when this happened. He said he was in his early 20s. And he said that he was pretty fast guy. Now, he said that he got down the hill and he kind of slid down an embankment and then kind of ran up another one, ran right past that house where he was, you know, this thing ran through the whole, whatever, just jumped over the embankment. And he said that by the time he got to his truck, it was already right behind him. He said, I didn't have time to open my door and, you know, get in the truck and start it up and all that. He said, I just jumped into the back of the truck and then over the back of the truck and just kept running and headed for the highway. And he said that this thing ran up to the truck, pushed the truck, turned the truck on its side, and then jumped up on top of the truck and collapsed the side of the back of the truck, you know, where the bed is, the bed of the truck. He said that side just collapsed. All you saw was the tire. He turned around and he looked. He said there was just that thing standing there on top of the truck, and then it just jumped off of it. And he said that at that point he just quit, just didn't even bother to look. He just kept running, ran all the way to the freaking highway and was like running down the frontage road of this highway, trying to wave down cars. And he just kept, you know, trying to get people to stop. He's screaming and yelling. And eventually a highway patrol picked him up about a mile down the road. And he told them what had happened. They went back to his vehicle and the thing was just destroyed. It had busted out the glass. And he told the highway patrol what had happened. And he said that this cop didn't even bat an eye. He was like, well, yeah, they're out here. You know, it was like this old cop and just, he's like, yeah, they're out here. You must have ran into a big male. They can be pretty nasty, you know, and like that's it, you know, like it was just like that. That's what happens, you know, you're in this territory and these things, whatever they are, they're out there and that's what they do. So I thought that was pretty messed up, you know, that story. That one was pretty crazy. But you get the idea that if that is a Sasquatch, I'm not saying that's what it was because I don't know, you know, but you get the power and the strength of these creatures, you know, and so that leads me into my into my other story that I have. This one came out of Montana, and I told you about this one, Vic. This one was crazy. Let me see here, and I got a couple of good ones. I hope you're ready because I got a couple good ones. So this story that I got out of Montana, and I didn't get a whole lot of information because we corresponded through typing. I am not good at typing. I can read your story and I can try to do the best I can, but just sending big long paragraphs, it's much easier to talk to you because I have a good memory. And if you give me your story, I know a lot of you people have already given me your stories and you know, I do the best I can to tell your story. And if you tell it to me, I can relay it a lot better than reading it and trying to, whatever. So if you have a story and you want to relate it to me, try to get in touch with me so we can talk because I'm a good talker and I'm good at relaying. I have a good memory too, and I can relay your story much better than if I just have to read it. You know what I mean? Cause like not knocking anybody, but you know, there was a story I told on one of the last shows and I did the best I could. You know, then the guy kind of gets in touch with me and he's like, that's not really how I, you know, well, you know what, dude, all I got was you typing it and, you know, you typed it all in capital letters too, which I didn't know if you were yelling or, you know, anyway, I'm not trying to bash on you, dude. You know who you are. I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but that was kind of, you know, he kind of got aggravated that I didn't tell it correctly the exact way. Well, would have been better if he would have given me, a phone number I could have called and talked to him. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just much easier, right? It's much easier. So if anybody wants to give me a story, give me some information. Tell me you have a story so we can talk on the phone, because it's just much easier for me. Okay. I don't know. You, Vic, you're good at like just reading and getting the stories and whatever. It's kind of hard for me. I'm like more of I can listen and learn better. You know what I mean? So anyways, that's that. Anyways, these people, they sent me they corresponded with me through the email, and they had some very strange activity happen on their property. First thing happened, a 7-year-old son went outside, take the trash out, and there is, for lack of a better term, a Sasquatch type creature, a Bigfoot, messing with the trash, like digging through the trash. Trash was strewn about everywhere. Kid had actually gotten in trouble previous to that because they had claimed that he might have been scared because he had been hearing noises out there or whatever. So when he went to the trash bin, they thought that he had just kind of thrown the trash and ran inside because he had complained that he had heard some noises. And he swore up and down his mom and dad, no, I didn't do that. Something got into the trash and strew it everywhere. Well, he comes outside. He sees this creature. He said that it was brownish black, he said the face was a cross between an ape and a caveman. That's the way the kid described it. Okay. He goes running back inside, gets the older sister. I guess he's got 2 siblings. The oldest sister comes out. She sees it too, like walking away. She doesn't see the face. All she saw was the back of this creature. It smells terrible. They said it smelled like the trash had gone bad or something, and it was really bad. Once this creature went away, then the smell was gone. So obviously this thing stunk. They said that on many occasions they had heard growls and snarls, things bumping into the house. Like they thought that it was like, maybe wild dogs or something. One of their dogs went missing. They had 2 cats. They went missing. So they automatically, with the older sister being able to vouch for this kid, they said, well, maybe that's what it was. Whatever this thing is, that's what's taking our pets. That's what's, doing whatever it's doing. Well, a couple days later, there was a disturbance down near a chicken coop, and the dad and his brother had gone down there to repair. The chickens had been disturbed or whatever, and they found these giant wolf prints. And he said they were really big. He said that this did not look like, and not only that, but it looked bipedal. And he said that the way that this thing, something tore just tore the chicken wire. He said it looked like, somebody had to have taken their hands and like pulled it apart. You know what I mean? And he said initially he thought, man, maybe it's a drifter or somebody, and they had a dog with them, like an oversized dog or something. So he didn't know what to make of it. And all the chickens were dead, and it was just like, what the heck, So they tell me that a couple times they had been driving up to the driveway. They had one of those gates. You had to like open the gate. I know I lived out in the country when I was a kid. It's a pain. So they had the kids. The kids always had to get out and do it. So you get out and you open the gate. One of the kids, it runs back inside the car, and she's scared to death. She says, I heard something bark. And he said that when when the dad got out and was like, oh, whatever, nonsense, he goes up to the gate. They had been living on this property for about 6 months. They had the bumping and the noises, pets disappearing, but they hadn't seen anything until they saw the big, what I think was a Sasquatch. He looks over to his left and he sees this thing down on all fours that looked like the biggest wolf he'd ever seen in his life. He said it was gray, and he said it looked just like a timber wolf, but he said it was weird, like the head of this thing, like the neck kind of like was even with the top of the head. Now that's how he described it. I really don't know like how to, just go by what he wrote, whatever. That's how he described it. So he got back in the truck, and they took off driving down, and he just like left the gate open, and they just drove back to the house. And he said that night he kind of went out around both sides of the property, with a flashlight looking to see if he could see anything. Didn't see anything. A couple days later, they hear this like whooping noise, and they would hear this clacking noise, like a popping clacking noise. He didn't know what it was. And he said they went around inside the house, they looked, they didn't see anything, and this would go on. And then one day something smashed against the side of the house, goes outside, and they're just like a giant, like, dirt clod, for lack of a better word. I mean, the way he said it was mud. I don't know I think it was like a dirt clod, and it was just like smushed on the side of the house. And he said that he heard like a whooping noise coming from the tree line. Well, a couple days later, he's out of town. He had to go to town or do something. I don't remember what it was. She said that she was washing dishes. The mom said that she was washing dishes, and she sees out in the pasture, like on the other side of, like, there was a barbed wire fence that separated her property from another property. She sees these, what looks like two gray wolves on two legs, just walking along that fence line, and they just, almost like men. She said they moved like men. She said one of them just ducked up underneath the barbed wire, and then it turned and lifted the barbed wire for the other one to crawl through, and they just started walking toward the house. And she was like, "Oh my God, what the heck? What is that? Like, what is that?" And she said that she came out onto the deck because it was just her and the kids there, and she was scared to death. She didn't want those things coming toward the house. And so she walked outside. She said that right there by the door, they kept a shotgun, and she said she walked out with it and was holding it, didn't level it at the creatures, according to what she said, but they stopped. They saw the gun. They saw her on the deck. They kind of looked at each other, and they got down on all fours, and they ran back to the other side of the property. Just weird. Like, she said that it was so weird the way that they moved and the way that they, it just really was like just bizarre. She said it was almost like they were like werewolves. She said that the same description, the neck was kind of even with the top of the head, and the head kind of sloped down. I don't know what that is. I mean, I don't know if that's like a different variation of another, she said they had the backward bent legs. I asked that question. I kept trying to get as much as I could, and whatever. At that time, I was really busy doing a lot of other things. So I was just kind of going back and forth. And this was, over conversations we had over like probably 3 weeks. You know what I mean? I was getting back in touch and then getting, so I pieced it all together, So anyway, this ends up, they decide they're going to sell the property because all this stuff is going on, and they can't have any animals. They had a couple goats that disappeared. The last straw, I guess you would call it, was they wake up in the morning, broad daylight, and there was this commotion going on. They go outside, the husband and wife, they go out to the back porch, whatever, and they see this big ape-like creature just punching something that's on the ground, just like wailing on it, whatever. They hear yelping and snapping and barking, and they see this other creature leap on the back of that and bite down on its neck. And they told me it was those two wolf-looking creatures, and they were just engaged in mortal combat with this Sasquatch. And that when it bit that Sasquatch, he tried to pull it and get it off of him, but they pulled it down, and then the other Dogman got up and started biting it. And she said that, you don't want to see a creature die. She said that she didn't know who was the good guy, who was the bad guy. She didn't really care. She yelled at her husband and well, I'm not going to say his name, but he grabbed, a gun and fired in the direction of these things, and they all kind of stopped, and she said that they were growling and snarling. The Bigfoot creature got up, kind of backed away from the other two creatures. One of them looked like he was hurt pretty bad. He was kind of crawling away, the other one was growling at it, and it stood up on its hind legs, and it was as big as that Sasquatch. She said that these things were probably 7-8 foot tall. The smaller, wolf-like creature, she said, was at least 6.5 feet. That's what they said. Well, I don't know what to make of it. I don't know, I've heard stories of these things encountering each other. Like I said, Dogman lives out in the wilderness with neighbors. They don't all get along. I'm pretty sure, so when they have to fight, I guess they have to fight, but, that's a pretty crazy story. And then they moved. And she said that night they went into town. stayed at a hotel, and then they went and got their stuff, and they got the heck out of Dodge because whatever was going on that property, they didn't want any more of it. So that's that, as they say. Tolstoy says that those that say they don't know who they are. Isn't that what he says? I don't know if that, is that correct? Anyways, are you there, Vic?
I am. If seeing something like that doesn't make you move, then yeah, I don't know what it's going to take.
Yeah. Moving right along. Now this one, I got permission to tell, and I'm not going to tell because, you know, I'm not going to tell the town or anything like that, but this happened in Mason County here in Texas. And I got this story about a year ago, right after the last time I was on your show, and I planned on going back, and then me and you went back and forth, and then I got sick, and then whatever. But anyways, these guys were kids, and they were all seniors in high school. This happened back in the mid to late 90s, I think. We'll call the guy Lee, okay? Lee told me that when they were kids, there was this place out in the country they liked to go to. It was like this little ridge. Like it wasn't real high up, you know. But he said that they'd go up on this little hill, I guess you call it. He called it a ridge, but you know, he said it wasn't real tall, but you kind of overlook a road, like a county road, and that county road was kind of desolate. And they'd go back up in there, and it was near the 4th of July, and so they went out there to pop fireworks, and so it was him and like several of his buddies. And he said that they all went out and they piled in the back of an old farm truck, and they went out there and they went to pop fireworks, whatever. And so they were out there shooting, doing whatever. And he said that they started, you know, doing what teenage boys do. They started shooting at each other with Roman candles, and that these things were firing, like going off into the bushes and stuff. And he said that they heard a snarling coming from the bushes. And he said, of course, there's like barbed wire fence all along, you know, there's all this debris, brush and everything. And he said that they heard this like weird, like noise coming from the bushes. And they were like, what is that? And then they heard like another one, like a little further down, like they heard like there were two different things like coming toward them. And then one of them thought, what is that? Did we hit something, you know, with these Roman candles or what? You know, everybody started like, shh, quiet, you know, like what's going on, you know? Because everybody started hearing, and then it got closer, and it was loud and crashing, and they see this snout come out between the bushes, and then they just see like this creature. And the way he described it, he said, I can't even tell you, just like it was like a creature just jumped over the barbed wire fence, and there was kind of a ditch, you know, and it was sitting in that ditch, and it just kind of sat there and looked at us. And he said it had a weird looking tail. Now, like I said, I didn't get the description of the tail. Like, did it look like a dog tail? Did it look like a tail? He said it looked so weird. He said the tail was thin. That's the only way he told me. He said it was like the tail was thin. And he told me, he said that the face of this thing, it had canine looking ears. Now this falls in the category to me of that less than 10% of not being a canine type Dogman encounter. I don't know what this thing was. But he said a smaller one came out and it started just walking down the road on all four legs, and it had human-like arms, skinny arms, backward bent legs, skinny legs, and he said he could see that skinny tail kind of swishing around behind it. And he thought, what in the heck what is this? And he said him and his friends just stopped, and they were just staring at it. And of course, one of them, pulled out a gun. They're country kids. I know this in Texas. Let me tell you something. Everybody in Texas is packing. You don't want to start mess around here, especially these country people, dude. They will shoot you. I am not kidding. You go down here, you start tromping around and trying to find these critters and going into these people's property, you're going to get shot. I can almost promise you that. These people, they will shoot you first and then ask questions later. Louisiana's kind of the same way. I got a lot of friends, Texas, Louisiana. That's kind of how it is down here. I don't know how people do it in other parts of the country, but if you go messing around on these properties, I'm just giving you that disclaimer. They will shoot you. Okay. So I don't want somebody going out there and messing around and trying to find something, and then you end up getting shot in the face. Okay. So that's just my advice to all of these would-be researchers or, guys. I'm not knocking any researchers. I respect everybody in this field that's trying to do what they're doing. Just be careful and make sure you get permission, because here in Texas, you will get your butt blown off. Believe me. So anyways, one of the kids pulls out a gun and just levels it at them. These things weren't afraid of the guns. It was like they didn't care. And typically, the Dogmen have what I have seen in this region. They are smart and they know what a gun is. They've been around them enough to know. Maybe they teach their young what they are. I don't know. But typically, I hear that they back off. They'll kind of stop or they'll gauge the situation. These two things started trotting toward him. And he said that they had humongous snouts, big, long snouts and kind of bushy hair. And he said that they had these really weird looking like hands, you know, and then the feet were weird looking. You know, they had like these elongated feet that kind of ended in the paws, you know. Now, sounds kind of like a Dogman, but it also sounds like, I'm going to say this, and some people may not agree with me, but the way they described this thing to me and my buddy, it sounded like a baboon. And I know that sounds weird, and people are going to be like, oh, okay, you know. Well, hear me out, dude. There was a prehistoric baboon. Now, I don't know if that you could say that they lived in this I have no idea where they lived. I just know that there was a prehistoric baboon that stood like 6 foot on all fours. And when it stood up, it was like 7 feet, 8, whatever. It was just an enormous creature. When he started telling me this, the way that he described these creatures, the way they loped, he said when they ran, they just kind of had this weird, you know, my words, lope gait, you know, but they ran really weird, you know, this funky. He said that it didn't look like a werewolf. Like I asked him, I said, was it like a werewolf, like a Van Helsing type creature? And he said, no, it was like a baboon. He said, but it was like not a baboon. You know, he goes, baboons are small. They're not that big, right? And I'm going like, well, I don't live in Africa, but I've seen them. You know, I have seen baboons at a distance, you know, and I, you know, I'm not around them all the time. So I'm not a behavioral specialist or whatever, but he said they weren't afraid of the gun. And then when they took a shot at it and it like the kid was afraid to actually, the one that pulled the gun first, there was a couple of them. He said that one of them shot and it just kind of ricocheted in between them and that they stopped for a minute and then they just kind of kept running toward him. And but then, what made me think that maybe it wasn't a baboon type creature, I don't know exactly what the heck this thing was. He said that one of them kind of stood up and began to run full sprint on 2 legs. But the way he described it, he said, you know, like if he had to, the way he told us, he said, if I had to put, like if I had to like say for sure what I thought it was, it's like if somebody took a wolf and they bred it with an ape, like a, you know, maybe like a baboon, and yeah, and taught it to walk on its hind legs. He said that's what it looked like. But he said that it didn't have a normal tail. It had a skinny tail. And it made this whooping noise. But he said they had huge snouts. And he said that they could see the teeth being bared, and they were big, big, big teeth. Now, he said that they got in the truck. They piled in the truck. He was one of the kids that was in the back of the truck. And everybody was screaming and yelling, and so they all just took off going down this dirt road trying to get back to the county road. And the way they had to drive out of there, he said we had to go winding down this hill, you know, to get back down to the county road. He said we had to go down that hill, and he said that these things, they closed the distance on us pretty quickly because we couldn't go that fast trying to get down the hill without wrecking. He said, and we were bouncing, you know, we're bouncing around this old farm truck. He said they finally got down to the county road, and by that point, these things were coming down the hill and coming at them sideways. And he said that to our left, they were right there. I mean, he said they were right there, and he said that one of his friends, he said the guy's name, I'm not gonna, we'll call him Reed. It started with an R, but he turned and he said he just fired point blank right into one of them's face. And he said that it looked like it fell back. And he said that one of the kids that was closer to Reed, that he saw like part of its head like disappear, like he killed it, is what he thinks, is what he said. But he said that the other one just kept running, and then it began to gain like on them, and that didn't even deter the other one from attacking. Like it kept coming. So he said that they fired at it a couple more times, but he said that, you know, one of the shots hit the back of the tailgate, you know, and like ricocheted in there, and it actually caught one of his friends caught a little bit of the buckshot into his shin. You know, from the, you know, he's like, it shot, you know, through whatever, but it ricocheted, you know, he said it was horrible. And so he said that that they ended up having to go and get this buckshot removed, from one of his uncle's friends. And he said it wasn't real bad, because the gun that he had wasn't a real powerful gun, but he said that it shot like a part of it hit the top of the tailgate or whatever. And he said that it was a mess, and they got back and this kid had, the shot in his leg, a little bit of it, whatever, in his shin or whatever. And he's like, my friend still has the scars, And he said that a couple of his friends just won't even talk about it. They won't acknowledge it. They don't want anything to do with that story. They don't talk about it. He said a couple of them do, And he said if I wanted to get the scoop from the other guys that he would put them in touch with me. I haven't corresponded with them, but anyway, that story is pretty crazy. I don't know what to make of that. That's a crazy story, dude. Like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that was. The more you hear about these things, the more you're just like, what is going on? What is this? What are these things? So I got another one, and I told you this one. These guys, they were this family. They weren't guys. It was a husband, wife, and their kids. They were vacationing, and they were going through South Dakota, and I guess they had stayed in an RV park. And the one thing I read when I went back and I reread this encounters is they said that they had heard a weird howling that night, and they said that they could hear it like echoing, So I don't know exactly where they were staying at or what. They were traveling. They were originally from Pennsylvania, no wait, I think they were from Ohio. Well, it doesn't matter. I get caught up in minutia sometimes. Anyways, these people, they were from, whatever, and they were traveling across the country, and it was summertime. And they were going through South Dakota. And they said that when they were driving down this desolate highway, there wasn't a lot of traffic. It was late at night, and they were getting tired. They were in an RV. And the mom, smoked cigarettes. She wanted to smoke. I guess the kids were in the very back of the RV, whatever, asleep, So she's like, I'm going to roll my window down and I'm going to smoke a cigarette. And the husband's like, okay. So they're driving along and they go around this curve. And he said that some of these curves were kind of, treacherous. So they slowed way down. And she said that they hear this like a rough, like a bark, like a, whatever. And the way that she put it was like a rough, so I'm assuming that's like a bark, right? But she said that this thing came out of nowhere and like slammed into the side of the RV. Now, I did ask. I asked. I was like, did it slammed in? Did you lose? Did you lose traction? Did you lose grip of the road? Did it? What happened? She said, no, it just came running up and it hit like my door. The side of the RV. And it just started like snapping and barking in like, like a dog, like a giant dog with this big snout. She said it was black. She said it was as black as night, and she said it was dark as heck. She couldn't see nothing. All she could see was the teeth and the eyes and this black shape, snapping in the window. And she said, I was trying to roll my window up and this thing reached up while they're going, 45 miles an hour or whatever, because they're trying to go around these curves, and they're not able to go really fast, and this thing reached up and stuck its hand over the top of the window. And she said, yes, hand. It had a hand. It was like a hairy hand. She said, I still remember its fingers going over the top of the window and then pulling. And like she said, she was just like already like almost in her husband's lap, And she said that this thing was just reaching over and that it reached in and it grabbed the seatbelt and then kind of like lost its grip and then just kind of slid its hand along the side of the RV. She said there were a couple little scratches on the side of it, and they got down to a straightaway and they just gunned it and they lost it. But that's crazy. Like you're just driving down the highway and some thing just comes running out of the darkness and, like an oversized dog that would just attack a car. Dogs chase cars. I used to have a friend that lived down the road from us and dogs chase cars. His blue heeler would always chase our vehicle. And the little turd, if he got a hold of your tire, he'd try to latch on. And I was always afraid we were going to kill him. But anyway, that wasn't the smartest dog. But anyway, I haven't really heard of I've heard of Dogman like chasing, going after vehicles, but I haven't heard of something like that, just like coming out of the darkness. They didn't even see it. It was just like, boom, it was there, bam, and it's like grabbing a hold of the freaking side of the thing, snapping and biting. And she said that thing's teeth came within an inch of her eyeball. So that's crazy. I don't know. Rabid? Maybe it's rabid? I don't know. But that was a pretty crazy story. Now that one, oh man. And now we go back to Texas. Now I have a friend. He's a good friend of mine. He owns a club, and he claims now this guy, he had an encounter years ago, and I told his story. Gosh, Vic, I can't even tell you what it was. Episode 59, 58, 55. 50, dude, I don't even remember. I don't remember which one it was. It was one of the earlier ones. And if you go back into the archives and you listen to my stories, he owns a club here in Austin. A lot of people know him. He's very open about it. He'll tell you his story, It happened in Lubbock, or outside of Lubbock, in that area, whatever. And his family had an encounter with a wolf-headed creature. Him and his buddy were playing in a cemetery. For those of you who remember, those of you who are new to any of my stories, that if you go back into the archives, you'll find that story. Now, he was telling me and my wife that not too long ago he had another encounter, but he said it was wholly different than what happened to him when he was a kid. And I asked him, I said, "What do you mean, Ash? What are you talking about?" He said, "I had an encounter." And when he told me this encounter, I remember a friend of ours that she lived down the road from us, for several years. And she had a friend that told me and my brother a story of something that had stalked her in that same area. So when he told me this story, my ears kind of perked up. I was like, wait a minute, He said that a couple years ago, not even that long ago, it was like 2016, I think he said, 17. He said he was coming home a couple years ago. And he said that, and I know that road that he was on, and it's right here in Austin. It's in South Austin, if anybody's familiar with Austin. He said that he was coming home and that he turned the corner, like there's kind of like this, not corner, but like a curve, I guess you want to call it. And it's not real sharp, but you kind of have to curve and then kind of straightens out. Now, he said that he kind of have to slow down around that little spot right there. He said that his eyes illuminated a creature that was down on all fours eating a carcass. Now, he said that this thing had backward bent legs, and he described the head. And you were with me when he told us. What did he say? The head. I'm trying to remember. He said that the head looked like a wolf's head without a snout. He said that it literally looked like, didn't look like that thing he saw when he was a kid. He said, the thing I saw when I was a kid was looked like quintessential werewolf. You know what I mean? Like that is what that was. He goes, it looked like a werewolf. If you took a werewolf from the movie Underworld, whatever. He said, this thing didn't look like that. He said it was down on all fours and it was chewing on something. He said it looked like it might have been a deer carcass. He said, I didn't get a good look at the carcass. I was looking at the thing. He said it lifted its head up. He could see teeth, and he could see the muzzle was red, like where it had been eating, and there was blood on its jaw. And he said it had hair, like on both sides of its face. And this is what he said. He said that this thing looked like it had hair on all over its body. It had the backward bent legs, but it didn't have the snout. So we started going through the different types of, like what kind of werewolf could this be? What kind of creature could this be? Was it he goes, this is going to sound silly, but he goes, it's like a werewolf from like Teen Wolf or something. He said that it was like, if you see these kind of werewolves where they don't have the big snout, or maybe a werewolf that's in mid-transformation. He said that's kind of what it looked like. He said it was just so weird looking. Now I've gotten a lot of skinwalker stories, and I've heard stories about skinwalkers, and I've heard that they don't make a full transformation. To me, what I think the skinwalker is something that's trying to mimic the Dogman, but that's not what it is. I do believe that there is a difference between all these creatures, and do I believe they exist? Maybe. You know, Dogman exists? Heck yeah. I believe in a Dogman. I've seen one. Do I believe that werewolves and all that other stuff? I don't know, man. I really don't. I've just gotten so many stories from, you know, different, that I just collect them and I spit them out, dude. That's what I do. You know, if anybody wants to debate about it, that's fine. You know, whatever you believe, what you believe. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I'm not going to tell you you're lying because I don't know. I really don't. It's a fascinating subject to me. And Vic, you know, you're like me. We're just trying to get the stories out there. So this is what he claims, right? So I had a friend and her best friend said that in that same area, a little bit north of where he saw that thing, that she was walking home from somewhere, the store or something. I think there's like a 7-Eleven over there in that area. She was walking home from the store. I can't remember the name of that street that it's on. I'm trying to remember. But anyway, she was walking home off of that street, and that she claimed that something was following her. Now there's houses in that area, Vic. I mean, it's not like it's a secluded, just totally, but especially back when she told me her story, it wasn't as developed as it is now. And even as developed as it is now, my friend saw what he saw. That was only like 2 years ago. But even since then, they've built even more because Austin is they're just building everywhere. They'll build houses on top of houses if they could. So anyways, she said in that time, and I remember living in that area at that time, that area was, there was a lot of trees, a lot of wooded area. There was probably each house had about an acre or two. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a subdivision, but then there was like a really densely populated neighborhood further north to that, not far. But that's where she was headed when she was walking through that subdivision at night, and she was headed for that other place. And she claims that she saw something very similar to that. She said that when I saw her one day downtown, she kind of reiterated the story to me, and she said, she's like, have you ever seen the movie The Wolfman? And immediately I thought Lon Chaney, you know, but she was like, you know, the one with Benicio del Toro. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, it looked like that. She said it came to the edge of the tree line. I saw it. And I asked her, I said, was it wearing clothes? And she says, no, I didn't see any clothes. It was kind of hanging back in the darkness. She's like, but I got the feeling that it was waiting for me to get to a more secluded spot so that it could jump on me. So she's like, so I walked back to the store. And that store had a funny name. It was right across from 7-Eleven. She gave me the name. I can't remember. But anyways, she walked back over there to where that store and the 7-Eleven and all that was. She walked back over there and then called her mom for a ride or whatever. She was like, I'm not going to walk this. She saw it kind of crouched down. And so I don't know what that was, man. I don't know what that is. I mean, I don't know if that's classified as a dogman, a skinwalker, a werewolf. I don't know what that is.
Well, whatever it is, it sounds pretty freaky to me.
Yeah. Yep. I'm just glad it wasn't me, you know, and I hate to be that way, but I was like, I told my friend that, I'm like, dude, that's why, you know, I don't mind going out walking, getting some exercise, but preferably with more than a couple people, and I'd preferably not in wooded areas. Because Austin, if anybody knows, I'm just gonna tell you this. People ask me all the time. Austin, San Antonio, and Houston, it's not a desert, people. Okay, y'all think that, I say y'all, it's Texas. Everybody thinks that we down here in Texas live in a big desert. Well, that's not true. The desert is in West Texas. It goes out, starts out near, I don't know, maybe Junction. Just west of Junction, and it goes out. If you look at a map, it goes all the way out to El Paso. That's a big area, and there's a lot of desert out there. But we don't live in a desert down here. Austin's very lush, very green. It's built into a forest. If you go east, you know, go out near Houston, it's called the Big Thicket. It's one of two places in the country that's considered jungle. The other one's the Florida Everglades. So Houston in the thicket, you go up I-45 from Houston up to Dallas. And everything to the east of that. That's just big old thick woods, man. That's piney woods. It's thick woods, and it's almost impenetrable. Lake Cato Lake is almost impenetrable from a satellite. And I've gotten all kinds of weird stories out of there. I could go on for days about that. But look, I'm telling you, Houston is just got like in the middle of the city. There's just huge wooded areas, just giant parks, you know. Hell, I've heard of a Bigfoot in Houston. I heard a Bigfoot story that happened in Houston in a park, you know. And I know that San Antonio, same thing, full of woods, a lot of water. You know, we got rivers that just all over the place here in Texas. The only lake that's a true lake here in Texas is Cato Lake, and all these rivers, the Brazos, the San Jacinto, you know, all these rivers, Colorado, they all run through here, and that's what our lakes actually are, is just dammed up rivers. So each major city in here in Texas, it has a major river running through it. So all the area around these cities is wooded, heavily wooded area. So people think that it's just a big dust ball down here. That ain't true at all, you know. And I'll tell you right now, I'll end it with this: that Sam Houston National Forest. I had a guy whose brother was hiking out there one time, and just straight up Dogman. It had to be. I mean, it jumped right out in the middle of the trail in front of him and his wife, and it just stood there and looked at him. And he said that it looked like a timber wolf, you know. And but it stood up, just kind of sniffed toward him, and then just loped back into the woods. And he said, dude, he goes, I'll never forget it. It was like right there at Sam Houston National Forest. And he said that this wasn't even like deep in the Sam Houston National Forest. He said this was like, you know, we had only been hiking for like 10, 15 minutes, and we saw this thing, you know. And I know that out there near Conroe, you know, that area, you know, that's a hotbed, a lot of Bigfoot activity. I hear a lot of stuff, you know. So if you're in Texas, you know, Texas, there's a lot of critters running around down here. And, you don't have to be in the woods either to find them, you know, because like I said, these cities have their own woods. All, you know, Austin's built in the middle of a freaking forest. Houston, San Antonio, same way, you know.
Yeah, there's an encounter that comes to mind where a Dogman was actually seen within the city limits of Dallas.
Yeah, well, I told one in one of your shows where a security guard, you know, when they were building a subdivision, and it was further out, you know, past Dallas, but it was close, you know, and the 10 minutes and you're in the city limits, you know, but it was like 10 minutes out of the city limits. It don't take much to get out there and see one of these things, and you know. And I get stories all the time, you know, but like I said, most of these encounters they're just like real brief. They see it and it's like, whoa, side of the road, you know, like my grandparents, they saw one on the side of the road one time. I know that when I was a kid, and speaking of the desert out in West Texas, when I was a kid, my grandfather, and I've said this on one of your shows, he claimed that, you know, my grandfather was he was a hillbilly. He was kind of an ignorant hillbilly, but he was a good guy. He was a big old hulking man that wasn't afraid of anything. But he, you know, me and my dad and him were driving through Pinto Canyon, and we were going from Marfa to Candelaria. If anybody knows that region out there in the desert, but real pretty deserted area. But we're going through this canyon, and he said that sometimes he would see these little coyotes, and they'd get up and run around on two legs. And I remember being like 9 or 10, and I look at my dad, and my dad looks at me, and we're just like, what? And like, he's like, oh yeah, these little coyotes, they run around like little men, like little, you know, like the Mexicans call them monitos, you know. And I was like, you know, and I'm half Hispanic, actually, my mom, you know, my mom's side. And my mom would always call my little action figures little monitos, you know, monitos, little men, you know. And my grandpa said, yeah, the Mexicans call them monitos, you know, they run around on two legs. It's like, it was just a normal thing, you know, and I'm like, wow. But, you know, pretty much all over Texas, there's a lot of stuff going on down here. There's all kinds of stuff. People claim they see a chupacabra, a weird looking creature with spines on its back. I don't know, man. You know, I've gotten so many stories from people, the woods down here, full of critters, man. There was one other story before we go. I wanted to tell you one last story, and I'd almost forgotten about it. This happened to a friend of ours, and he told me and several people that are in my inner circle of friends, my brother and my wife was like, you got to tell that story. He was a tow truck driver, and I don't want to give away his name because he's still working. He works for a different company now, but he's been doing it for years and years and years. And I don't know how he's still going, but he's been driving, doing repos and tow truck driving for about 30 years. And, actually told me a couple stories, but one in particular was his story. The other one was a story that he told me about a driver that had told him something. I'll start with that little short one first. He told me that, when they go to these tow yards or whatever, they drop the vehicles off and stuff. And he said that this guy said that one day he, went to go pick up a vehicle from one property that was way out in the country, near a town outside of Austin out here. And, when he went to go pick it up, apparently there was this, what he thought was like a giant wolf asleep under one of these cars, and he could hear it snoring, and he was like, what is that? And he thought, oh no, they got a big dog. So he started heading back to his truck so he could get his, weapon or whatever. And, I didn't ask what kind of weapon it was. He just said he went back to get a weapon in case this thing tried to attack. And he said that as he was walking by the car, he kind of glanced and he saw the tail kind of move up and down. It was a big shaggy tail, and he was like, oh my God, that's the biggest dog I've ever seen, And he said that this thing kind of woke up because it heard him moving around, and of course he's like in a rec yard, and he's going to get something, to pick up something to take back to the other yard or whatever. And he said that whenever this thing woke up, it moved, the car lifted up off the ground. And he said that it was like shocking, like, whoa, like what could do that? And then he said it started to scramble out from underneath the vehicle. And so he ran back to his truck, and I guess he was carrying a chain or something, and he just let go of it, and he thinks the chain noise might have been what woke it up. And he said he ran back to his truck, and then he said when he got in the truck, this thing was standing up at that point outside of this vehicle that it was asleep under. And he said that it was just like maybe 4 foot taller than the car. And he said the car was like an old Dodge car, like a muscle car. And he described the car. I don't know much about cars. I just remember, we were in the bar and he was telling me this story, And this is years ago when he told me this. This story told me was way back in like 1997 or something, late 90s. And this happened back in like the late 80s, because he said it was about 10 years ago. So that would have been, 87 or something. And it was because my friend Willie that worked with me for a long time, he was telling that guy my story about what had happened to me, because I didn't really like to tell it back then so much, but some of my close friends knew, and they would kind of tell me, tell that story, because it was, but anyway, so he said, I got a story. So he started telling, us this story. And now this guy, his particular story that happened to him, that was a friend of his story. Now this guy, of course, he hauled out of there. He just said the thing looked like a giant wolf, that it was standing up, and it was on the other side of the car, just staring at him. It didn't do anything. It didn't come toward him. And he drove out. But he got real serious when he told me his encounter, and I'll always remember this story, but he had asked me never to tell this story, like to not, he told me and two or three of the people at that table, and he was very serious about it. He goes, don't tell that story, because at the time he thought that it might have gotten him in trouble or something, because there was something that could have, and so for years and years, I never said anything about it. And then about 3 years ago, one of my friends reached out to him right after my first, time on your show. And he said, you know what? It's been so long, he goes, nothing ever came of it, like, go ahead, tell that story. And I just kind of forgot about it. It was kind of buried in my notebook, because that's kind of what I do. I just keep it in a notebook. There's no real magic. It's just all written in notebooks. When I get a story, I try to commit it to memory as best I can and write down details if I need to. So anyways, I got permission to tell the story. And in fact, I don't even think he minds if I use his name, but just so nothing will, nobody will mess with him or whatever, he's an old guy now, and I don't think he needs to be messed with. So I'm going to leave his name out, but a lot of my friends that are going to be listening, they'll know who I'm talking about. So anyways, or you'll even remember the story if you were there. What he told me was that back in the late 80s, he got a call to go and pick up a vehicle. And it was from the police department, from the sheriff's department. And it wasn't in Austin. It was outside of Austin. So, you know, I'm not going to get into it, but it was an outside county. And he gets out there, and there's a vehicle that's on the side of the road, and it looked like it had been torn to shreds. The side of the car, the door had been ripped, not completely off, but it was hanging off. And he said that it looked like something had clawed the inside of the seats, and there was blood all in the car, and there was blood all the way outside of the car going up into the woods. And that they had cordoned the scene off, whatever, there was a shoe. That's all he saw. And the two officers that were there were talking to one another, and he went to go and start getting the vehicle to get it, you know, onto the truck or whatever to tow it. And they told him that as best they could figure, something or someone had attacked somebody. And one of the officers looked him dead in the eye and told him that when he arrived on the scene, like he saw the vehicle on the side of the road, that there was something on the edge of the woods that was down, and it appeared to be over a body, over a person. And he said that it had its head down, and that it was doing whatever, you know, as best he could tell, chewing on it. And he said that, you know, he immediately called for backup. Several other officers came. He got back in his car. This thing pulled the person or whatever into the woods, the body, whatever. And the officer was like, he's like, I was too afraid to even try to confront or shoot. You know, I was by myself. It's on a desolate road, you know, and this had probably not been, that vehicle probably had not been there very long. You know, he said the blood and everything looked like it was dried, but it was probably just like several hours, you know. And I don't know how advanced police techniques were back in the 80s. I have no idea. And there again, I don't even know if the guy's story is completely accurate. You know, when he told me this story, it was from his memory from 10 years before. And I'll be honest, he had been drinking, and we had all been drinking when he was telling me this story. But he was very, I don't know if the word is poignant. I don't know. He was very on point about it. Like, he was very matter of fact. He wasn't joking, and he was very serious about this story. And he told me, he's like, I don't know, you know, what the implications, you know, like of me talking about what the police told me, like if that, you know, because this guy was always kind of on the shady end of things too. So I didn't want to, like, you know, make him feel like I was going to go and blab about this, you know, because this police officer told him something in confidentiality. And was like, he told him, just keep it to yourself. He goes, but that's what I saw. And he goes, and I don't know how they're going to write this up, if it's going to be a missing person, a homicide, an animal attack. But that's a story that I got. And I was just like, and when I, you know, like I had said before, I was like, oh, that's the last of my stories for now. You know, I got some other stuff, but I'm just not ready to you know, I'm not finished with all the, investigations and stuff to try to get the whole stories of, but definitely we'll be getting back together. And like I said, I'm planning on trying to start up next week, and me and Armando are going to be doing some stuff, trying to get ourselves ready. And so I hope that everybody's listening will tune in and listen to my stories. You know, I plan on I spoke to Chris Edge earlier today, and hoping to get him on, you know. And Chris is said he's on board, and to come on and do a show with us, and yeah. So, anyways, that's it.
I can think of a lot of bad ways to go out, but death by Dogman, that's about as bad as it gets.
Yeah, I mean, if it's true, you know, there's going to be those that say, oh, that's not true. It didn't happen. But this guy, I've known this guy for years, and he's a very no nonsense guy. He doesn't talk a lot unless he has something to say. I mean, let me tell you, I got broke down one time out near Seguin. If anybody in Texas knows where that's way out there. And I was out there messing around, and car broke down, and so I called him, and he came out there to get me, and we drove all the way back into Austin, and he probably spoke 2 words to me. He's always real friendly, big old guy. He's just a man of few words. I mean, he was from Louisiana, and when he talked about that story, he told me straight up, he's like, it's a loup-garou. He goes, that's what did it. It was loup-garou. He's a Creole, and I was like, maybe you're right. I don't know. When he told me that story. But anyway, there are going to be those that say that it happens, those that say it didn't happen. I can't tell you. I wasn't there. In 1986, I was playing with G.I. Joes and Transformers. So I know the Astros went to the NLCS that year, and they lost to the Mets, and I've hated the Mets ever since.
Well, like I told you before, Josh, if I can help in any way, helping you to get that show off the ground, then by all means, please do let me know. And also, as I'm sure you already realize, a lot of us are really looking forward to that first episode of it. So, I wish you the best of luck with all of it.
Well, I'd like to just put a disclaimer right out the crack of the bat and say that the first episode may not be the best. I hope because we're going to do what most people do when they do their first episode. I can think of a lot of shows, man, and there's some really good ones out there. Oh my gosh, the field is littered with good shows. And you go back to the first 1 or 2 of those, and a lot of those guys, I've talked to several people in this field, and they'll be like, man, our first show was terrible. Our second show, and they finally get it going. And you've told me that too, that it takes a little time maybe so if it's not the best thing that came out, when it first comes out, give me some time, be patient, and we've already gone over like kind of what we're going to do with the first and second and maybe third installment. And, yeah, so I mean, just tune in, even if you're not, if you're just 100% Dogman fan, there'll be some Dogman stuff there, but we're going to do a lot of other stuff too. Like I told you, Vic, I'll come back and do some Bigfoot Eyewitness. I got a lot of reports that I can give you. Ton of Bigfoot stuff, man. I tell you, I get a lot of Bigfoot stuff. and if any of you out there are into ghosts, anything like that, I got a lot of good, like just really, and I can't emphasize, really creepy ghost stories, like really bad. I'm talking like I can get these people on there and they'll tell you. I mean, they'll tell you their stories, dude. One guy in particular, I'm not gonna mention his name because he's one of the Dogman group people, but he gave me a horrifying ghost story when he was living in France, and it was just like, oh my god, dude. I mean, it was like it. My wife said it scared her so bad she couldn't go to sleep because I told her the story. And what was really creepy was like I got up and I was checking my emails, and I get this email from this guy, and I read it, and I'm sitting there in the dark in this office by myself. And there's like, my wife's down the hall asleep, and it's just me in there. And like, my dog, I had the door partway open, and my little dog, he comes running in, and dude, man, I like to jump out of my chair. I was like, oh my God. I don't get scared easy, man, but that story just really unnerved me, dude. And I'll just say this, it involved mirrors, and mirrors are really creepy to me, dude. I've had some stuff happen, so I just was like, oh my God. So yeah, anybody wants to tune in and hear some stuff, be scared, because that's kind of what it's going to be. I mean, there's going to be some stuff. A lot of it's going to be, stories that we got from some people, and like people that I know personally have had encounters, and then some of my own, because I lived in a house that had some stuff going on for a while, about 10 years worth, and, so if anybody wants to tune in, that would be great. And, I appreciate you, Vic, everything you do. You actually care about people. I can 100% say that, because there's like a lot of people out there that are just doing a show. They don't really care about the witnesses and the people. And I had this woman that she's a kind of a friend on Facebook, whatever. And she told me, she's like, I like you. I like when you talk. She was, but I get the feeling that you don't really care about the witnesses because you just want the story. And I wanted to clear the air about that. If you give me a second here. That's not true. I just have a way about me that I can be pushy. Those of you that have given me your stories and I've interviewed you, you know that I do the best I can. I may not be as considerate and patient as Vic, and I'm sorry if I'm not, but I have to try to commit, your story as best I can to memory, because it's hard for me. Reading things don't really work for me. I have to like hear it. You know what I mean? And I guess that would be called like an audio learner. Like if somebody's telling you it's better for you. Now I can focus. If I focus, I can read, but better, but it's much easier for me to read over it and then talk to the person, because I can get a better feel for it, because the emotion is there, and you can build the story better from the emotions. Because if you just read something, you don't know what the emotion is. It's just robotic. You know what I mean? Like you're just kind of like, okay, I guess this guy, he said he was afraid. I mean, but when somebody's talking to you, and this because they talk to you, they can convey how they really felt. And it's much better. And so that, to me, is like kind of the linchpin, like I need to be able to do that. And so, if I'm pushy when I'm interviewing people to try to get their stories, it's just my nature. And I'm not trying to be insensitive or anything like that. And I do sometimes kind of go after the story, because I want to know. And it is weird, because I will meet random people and not even know them for an hour, and I'll ask them about stuff. And people, they think it's weird, but I think everybody has a story. I think everybody on this planet has had something weird happen to them. I worked with the guy for 2 years, and I remember him saying, nothing weird's ever happened to me. Nothing ever happened to me. No, never had anything weird. Nope, never. And then one day we're shift changing, and he just tells me, there was this one time when I was back in the military, and then he told me a story. It wasn't a Dogman story, but he told me something weird happened to him. And I was like, for 2 years, this guy told me there was nothing that ever happened. And whenever he'd hear me and the other guys talk about it, he would be like, oh yeah, nothing ever happened to me. And then one day, all of a sudden, he says, well, there was this one time. I don't know if you consider it weird. And then when he told me the story, I was like, yeah, that's kind of weird. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't have considered that sort of a paranormal thing, but whatever, man. I think everybody's had something happen. Even the most hardcore skeptic has had a door move by itself or something happen, and you're going like, how did that happen? Obviously the world is not as cut and dry as we think it is,
There are a lot of shades of gray, and it sounds like that old boy was holding out on you big time.
Yeah, or he just didn't, believe that it was something weird. And I guess he just, and I told him, I just said, that's bizarre. You didn't think that was something. He's like, well, I never really thought about it much. It just kind of happened, and I don't know. Especially with that older generation, they just don't want to cop to anything. Like, they don't want to say, hey, this is there or it's not there, And then there's some people that it just scares the crap out of them, and they just don't like to talk about it because it just scares them. I've known people like that. They'll have weird stuff happen to them, but they'll never tell you. They don't want to talk about it. They just want to put it out of their mind and just pretend like it doesn't exist or that it didn't happen, and that's just the way it is. They want to live their life that way.
It's understandable when people that experience something traumatic like that do that, but like I tell eyewitnesses, trying to suppress a bad experience with, say, a Dogman, if you try to suppress it and just put it away and try not to deal with it, that's no different than opening up a bedroom door in your home and seeing a fire blazing on your bed and just slamming the door shut and saying, nope, don't want to deal with it. It's no different. It is no different. It might be out of sight, out of mind for just a little bit, but the fire's still burning and it needs to be dealt with. It's no different.
Well, like the old timers used to say, my great uncle, he had this saying, the crows always come home to roost. And whatever happens, it's not something you can just ignore, in your life. There's things that the price will always have to be paid one way or the other. And so when you ignore things, like for years, I tried to, after I talked about my experience, because, I had an experience, and after I talked about it, I tried to push it down, for a long time. And I had the nightmares. And I think when I was suppressing it, then the nightmares kicked in high gear. I told you that I used to have really bad nightmares. I don't have them anymore. I think one of the things that's helped is just talking to other people about their encounters and knowing that that I feel like I went in a different direction than the people that I was with. Like, I think some of them thought it was some sort of demonic spiritual thing. And for me, I just kind of figured out that it's not a demonic spiritual entity in my mind. I think it was just a physical, whatever, manifestation of whatever, I think it's physical. It wasn't a spiritual manifestation. It was a physical being. You know what I mean? And that's the difference. I think once I finally came to terms with it, it was just like seeing any other creature out there, albeit, I guess the word would be aberration, It was an aberration. Like, it was not something that's normal, not something that you come across every day. It's not like seeing a deer. Like Austin, there's deer everywhere. You can just drive down Lamar and there's deer, and you're just like, wow. When my wife first came, she was like, there's deer everywhere. And she don't have a bunch of deer where she was at, And so she's just like, it's crazy. They're just all over the place, And, here there's just like, they're everywhere. But you just go anywhere and there's deer. But you don't see a dogman. You don't just go driving down the road. Hey, look, there's a dogman. It's like a normal thing. It's not a normal thing. And I think that that's what I had to come to terms with. And for a long time, I thought it was almost like I saw a demon, and I felt like I was being stalked by it. And I honestly think it was just in my own mind. Like, it was my own mind telling me that that's what it was, trying to come to terms with it. And the people that I was with thinking that that's what it was. Maybe that's what, I can only guess at what they were thinking, but I kind of assumed that that's what it was, that they just really believed it was demonic or something. And I like I said, so many people see them and they think that they're this or they're that. Now, I do believe a little differently than some people. I believe, like I said, in that there are different types of entities that can mimic these creatures. And I don't know what that is. And like your show, you don't really delve into the whole idea of shapeshifting or these things being shapeshifters. But I got to tell you, I have gotten several stories, from these things, about these things being able to shapeshift. And me and you had agreed a long time ago we weren't going to talk about those encounters on the show, because that's not really what your thing is. It's just about straight up dogmen. And I can't really say for sure that those are dogmen. You know what I mean? Because a dogman to me seems to be more of just a solid flesh and blood creature. I guess that says the definition. If we had to put a definition on it, me and you, we agreed that the dogman is its own separate thing. It's the way it is all the time.
Exactly. By immersing yourself in the dogman topic the way you did, and at some point eventually going by the name Wolf, basically what you did was normalize yourself to the fact that dogmen are a reality.
Well, actually, that is funny, because I never called myself. I didn't like that for it was a good 5 years maybe where people would call me that, like teasingly, like friends and stuff. And it was Wolf Boy. And I'll tell you right, man, I used to get so mad. I beat a few people up. I'm not going to lie. They know who they are. I have friends of mine from my hometown. I smacked a few people, dude, that would call me that and kind of tease me and stuff. And I can tell you, I got a buddy. I can tell you right now, I got a buddy. He was, in fact, I'll just say his name's Max, a good friend of mine. He can tell you, he's on my Facebook, and he was saying he was going to listen to the show. And, I used to beat people up. I tell you what, man, somebody make fun of me, man. Because they start talking that mess about, oh, you Wolf Boy, oh, you saw the werewolf, blah, 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 and I get real hot, man. I'd get mad, and then when I started working security, I worked for the housing authority here in Austin for a while, and it was government housing, it was the projects. I worked in those places, and I had this one guy that, he knew my uncle, and my uncle and them had kind of started calling me Wolf, and so one day he just started calling me that, and then everybody out there started calling me that. And then when I started working at the club, that name just followed me. It just kind of became Wolf, and then everybody called me that. And, I'd get into fights and stuff in them hip hop clubs, and people would think that, that I was this ferocious guy that, that name did not start out like that. It started out as a derogatory thing where they're kind of teasing me, you know what I mean? And it really, it got on my nerves, for a long time. And then it didn't help. It didn't help that I was getting, that I was having these nightmares, and you know, and when somebody would tease me, you know, it was like it was bad enough of what I was going through, you know, because it bothered me to a certain degree because I think I was more of an emotional kid, you know, and I think that it just bothered me. My home life was crap. I had a horrible childhood, I guess you could say, and I had a lot of pent up anger, and that just led to it, you know, and it just compounded it. So it made me an angry person, you know, to have to, you know, so hearing that name when I was younger was not a good thing. But, you know, I turned a negative into a positive, like you said, and I'm one of those curious people that's why I'm into the paranormal. I want answers. I want to know. I do want to know, and I want to know. And the more I hear from different people, the more I can kind of make my own opinion about what they are, and kind of like, I don't know if you'd say cultivate, you know, my own belief, or how would you say it? I don't know. Like to kind of like, you know, you glean what you can from these encounters and try to figure out a behavioral pattern for these things. Try to figure out like what they are. You get more of a sense of what they are, and you know. And I know there's guys that go out and they look for these things, and I'm not knocking them. Get more power to you, you know. But I do think that's a very dangerous thing to do. You know, I think these creatures are very dangerous. I've heard from so many people like that have told about their encounters, and they've lived to tell about them. But by the same token, you got people who write books about people disappearing all the time. I'm not going to mention, you know, names and all that, but there's proof, you know, that there's these people go missing constantly in these wooded areas, and there's no telling what's really going on. I mean, you know, and if someone is attacked by these things, it's not written up as like, oh yeah, they were snatched up by a dogman, a werewolf. They don't say that. They said that it was like a bear, a cougar, a coyotes, you know, wild dogs, whatever. So people that say, well, there's no proof they've ever attacked nobody. They can't. Of course there's not. I mean, what newspaper is going to go, oh yeah, werewolf killed this woman. Yeah, that's what happened. Ripped her throat out. They're not going to say that. They're just going to say she was attacked by dogs. She was attacked by dogs. She was attacked by wild animals. That's what they always say. And I know that I talked about on one of your shows. I can't remember which episode. I've been on so many times, but there was this one episode I remember I talked about it, and it was down the road from where we were working at that time. And sheriff's department came by there, and they were flying because there's like 16 different dogs and cats had gone missing. Do you remember that, Anthony? When they were flying? Yeah, my nephew's sitting right here. Like they were passing out flyers about these, you know, and they said to keep your dogs and cats inside and blah blah blah. Well, I started talking to this cop, and he was telling us that he didn't think it was a coyote because somebody's horse had its leg torn almost completely off by whatever did this. So, yeah, okay. Pack of coyotes, they're not going to attack a horse, all right? I don't give a crap. I've lived in the country for a big chunk of my life, and I can tell you right now, I've dealt with coyotes and coy wolves. They're here too. I have pictures of them. That, you know, they don't go out and attack horses, man. So whatever did that was big. And even a full-grown cougar would be, you just don't hear about them jumping on a horse and attacking it. You know what I mean? And like I talked about, I think it was episode 116 with Shane. We'll call him Shane. He had his horse. You know, like this thing went right at him. I mean, you know, sometimes these things are bold enough to do that. You know, and so to me, I just don't believe. You know, I don't believe that these are benign, benevolent creatures. I think that they're at the top of the food chain. You know what I mean? And you know, as you know, I mean, Bigfoot, he ain't no punk. You know, Sasquatch, I got some hair-raising tales from these Sasquatch people out in the woods that have had problems with these things. You know, and Dogman, they go toe-to-toe with them. You know, I've heard it over and over again, like they'll fight them, you know, and they'll kill other animals, other predators, you know. Have yet to hear about one fighting a bear. That'd be interesting. If anybody's got one, you have ever seen any kind of interaction between them and a bear, that'd be interesting, right, Vic? I mean, I bet it does. They probably have altercations where they, you know, have to come in contact with them. You know, I mean, if they're willing to pull a gator out of a pond that they want to bathe in and kill it, I mean, why not? They might run off a bear. And in particular, that they are wolves in my mind. And I'm not saying this is what you believe or anything else, Vic, but I believe that they're wolves. They are evolved wolves of some sort, of some kind, with human level intelligence. They have packs or tribes or clans. And I think that they have territory, and they'll defend that territory. And I think they have a leg up on a lot of other critters out there, because they'll go and get their friends, and they'll come back. I mean, they're like gang members, dude. You know what I mean? It's like you disrespect them, and then they come back in force, and they'll do something to you. They'll mess up your day. I tell you right now, I've had a lot of people tell me a lot of different stuff about them. And like I said, we'll get into more tales. I still got a good half a dozen just ready to go. Like, just, got to finish up on the investigations, and I'll be back. And, I'll be on my show, and hopefully, like I said, you'll come on my show. We can talk, and I want Chris, if you're listening, Chris, I want you on my show. I think that kid, man, he does a great job. I can't say enough good things about Chris Edge, dude. I love that kid. I mean, he is, to be as young as he is, and to be, doing what he does, man, he's a go-getter, dude. That kid, he's going to be something, dude. I'll tell you right now, we're watching that kid blossom. I can tell you. I feel good about that guy.
Oh, yeah, he does have a lot of talent. You've got a lot of talent, too. I'm looking forward to having not only his show online, but having your show up and running as well.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And see, I can't say enough about some of the guys that have been there for me. I've spoken to these guys. They've been encouraging and nice. Simon Young, I want to throw a name out there. Him and David Kalman, always class stand-up guys. Real cool dudes, man. I like them. Luke Penton, I like Luke. I mean, me and him, we're cool. I'd love to do some shows with any of those guys that want to come on and talk or whatever. And of course you, Vic, you're the king as far as I'm concerned, dude. You're the man, brother. You're the man.
Well, thanks for saying that, but yeah, far from it.
You know what, Vic? You are the class act. And I don't know, and if you want to edit this out, you can, but I will say this, that whole thing that happened with that show, that Midnight in the Desert. I don't know if I can talk about that, but you handled that like a true gentleman, like a class gentleman that you are. You didn't start mudslinging, and you even discouraged other people. You were like, you know what? I'm not going to stoop to that level. You just handled it like, and my wife was just lecturing me earlier. She was telling me, she's like, now this is what you need to do. If somebody comes and messes with you, you need to act like Vic and just be very humble and be very, and I'm thinking to myself, I'll try. Because I don't know if I have that, because you have the patience of Job, and I don't think I do, but I know the way that you handled that situation was like, I would have been tempted to do different things, but you were just like, you rose above it like nobody else. And that's why I think your followers, they love to listen to your eyewitnesses, and they love to listen, but they love you because you really convey that to people, that you care about people and you're trying to help people. I mean, you really are. That's what you're doing. I mean, when you first talked to me, the first time I talked to you, it was like, I can talk to this guy. He doesn't think I'm crazy. He's listening to what I'm saying, and he might be willing to listen to my other stories, that I've gotten over the years, because I had collected them, because that's what I did after that happened. I was just like, man, I'm going to, anybody out there that could tell me that I'm not crazy, because you want that. You want confirmation that you're not nuts, man. I mean, and when I talked to you, it was like, here's somebody that will listen to me, you know what I mean? And not just tell me like, oh, you must have been smoking something. You must have been drinking, blah, 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 whatever, because people make jokes. And me, when somebody started popping off and making jokes about these, what happened to me, I get mad. I get real aggravated, and so it was a comfort to me that other people had come forward and kind of told me their story, but they weren't willing to like go beyond that. You know what I mean? Like back me up publicly. And that I felt really alone, and you were one of those people that, when I finally, I just said, you know what, I reached out to you, and it was like you threw me a lifeline and said, you know what, come on board. There's others that are like you, and it made me feel good to know that there are, because I hadn't really been like, I'd really not wasn't really like listening to any of these shows or wasn't into any, and then I just came across your show, and I was just like, wow, this guy, and so I sent my story into you about what happened to me, and the rest is history. And I like what you do, and I appreciate that you're there for these people.
Well, thank you very much for saying all those things, Josh, but yeah, you give me way too much credit. Way too much. But it's awfully nice of you, though. Thank you.
There again, you're being modest.
Oh, no, that's the truth. No, I just do the best I can to help eyewitnesses out, and there's really nothing remarkable at all about what I do. I just try to treat them the same way I would want to be treated if I was in their place, and that's all there is to it. But having said that, Josh, we really need to wrap this, so we probably better get ready to get out of here. But before we do, I want to thank you again so much for coming back on and sharing all those stories with us. And like I said before also, I wish you the best of luck with your new show, and if I can ever help you with it, please do let me know.
I will.
That sounds good to me. Well, thanks again so much for your time. Have a great night. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.